Just a couple of weeks ago, we were excited by the prospect of returning players. Kyle Tucker, Justin Verlander, possibly Kendall Graveman. Tucker is finally back in limited capacity. We'll see how that goes. The Graveman updates have gone quiet, so his return was always unlikely. It looks like that's highly unlikely now. But Justin Verlander's return was one where we were looking at as something that could really help solidify Houston's rotation. Instead, it has raised grave concerns, no pun intended there, grave concerns about Verlander. And, now we're talking about questions of whether he should even make the postseason roster, which is, crazy to think about. But here we are. JV says he feels fine, but the mechanics just aren't there. So I'm going to open it up to you guys. How much do you think this is rust on JV side, or how much are we more likely approaching the end of the line for Justin Verlander's Hall of Fame career?
I think, benefit of the doubt to an extent that there is an element of rust, but you don't want to be getting worse as more of that rust should be knocked off. The Diamondbacks lead the major leagues in runs scored, but Sunday night, just in terms of the results, what a travesty. But Verlander's fastball is still down. The command is way off. And Father Time is a mean SOB. If you fight him to the death, you lose. We all lose. And Verlander, right, 40 wins away from the holy grail of 300. I mean, come on. That's pretty much entirely off the table. Will that impact his offseason thinking, along with he's crashing his market, right? He knew he wasn't going to get $43 million per year again. But, he should be getting a low base, incentive-laden deal between his health injuries. And the man's ERA is now 5.20. Over a dozen starts, right? It's not just one lousy start that destroyed the numbers. And a quick aside, because it's part of what we do here, right? Arrighetti's abomination in Cincinnati, you didn't catch it. They changed that ball that Pena clearly should have made the play up the middle on to an error. Saved Arrighetti 6 earned runs and a half a run off his ERA, getting him back below 5 for the season. Of course, Jeremy Pena now with 19 errors as his defense continues to be just woeful over the last month. Ever seen a guy make as many spectacular plays in the hole, the jump throw to first to get a guy, and then botch routine plays as he's done like 7 times in the last 3 weeks? Okay, that was probably a record length aside. What was the original question? Oh, yeah, Justin Verlander. 3 starts max to go, right? The Astros are in a very strong position to finish off the division, but they're not there yet. Also, still trying to fight and catch Cleveland. They're not charity starts they're giving to Verlander at this point, but barring a complete unravelment, if that's a word, from Kikuchi, who finally had a subpar start, from Arrighetti, who's frankly entitled to one off start after being nothing but magnificent 7 starts in a row before that, Verlander should not be on the playoff roster because you're not using him out of the bullpen. And, you don't suit him up just because he's a veteran leader. He can sit in the dugout and be that without consuming a roster spot when you don't need 13 pitchers to begin with. And right now you have 5 starters who would be ahead of him. It was just 2 innings in garbage time over the weekend against Arizona. But Blanco comes in and blowtorches the Diamondbacks with 5 strikeouts in 2 innings. The rest time, skipping him a couple of turns before putting him back in the rotation this weekend. Ronel Blanco's clearly ahead of Verlander on my postseason positioning scorecard right now.
It's tough, right? Because, he will get a few more opportunities, and Joe Espada is going to give him every chance. We saw it in that Cincinnati game where Verlander's like, I'm not coming out. And sure enough, he didn't pull him out of the game. So there is some of that leadership. We're going to give you some credit for stuff you've done on your resume. So we'll see how that plays out. But if he continues to pitch like this down the stretch, he'll make their decision for him. But a lot of the problem is his secondary pitches. He's struggling to get them over for strikes, which is causing him to throw more four-seam fastballs, which he's kind of wild in the zone with those pitches, and they're getting crushed. Chandler Ohm had an article this week about how his four-seam fastball is getting hammered much more than over the course of his career. And, when you're wild in the strike zone, that's going to happen. And he doesn't throw 98 miles an hour anymore. Now, he was hitting a respectable 94. You could deal with that. I remember when John Smoltz, towards the end of his career, Kurt Schilling, those guys were painting, 93, 94 with their secondary pitches, and they were fine. But if you can't hit your locations with that fastball and mix in the other pitches, only throwing 93, 94 is going to start to be a much bigger problem. I mean, we can think of Greg Maddux. There's all kinds of guys that didn't throw 95 that had a lot of success, but you got to be able to locate. You got to be able to change speeds. And Verlander just doesn't have a feel for it. Now, they said that his slider, they felt like had some good shape and that pitch is coming along, but clearly that the results aren't there. And Verlander feels it. Part of it's probably the mechanics. Mechanics are going to have a lot to do with your location, your release point. And if that's something he's still working through, you can't put him out there in the postseason if you have very clear, better alternatives. So I hope for all our sakes that JV does turn back into that guy. As much as we like Eric Getty and some of these younger guys, they don't have the playoff resume Justin Verlander has. I think in the best of worlds, Verlander would come out and be lights out in these next 2 or 3 starts, give you a lot of confidence going with him. But based on what we've seen lately, it's hard to believe that's going to be the case. So, we'll see. These next few weeks are going to tell us everything. You wouldn't think that we'd be here with Verlander, but he's 41 years old, eventually, and coming off a few injuries, and those things are going to keep manifesting as you get older. And that's just the way baseball works.
If he has a decent start this weekend against a AAA Angels lineup, whoa, JV's found it. No, that'll mean that actually is the sore thumb sticking out amongst a number of bad starts. I've read a couple of things that the Astros need Verlander on his game to win in the postseason. No, they don't. The Astros can't win in the postseason without Kyle Tucker in the heart of their order. Yes, they can, right? Short series baseball, right? Jeremy Pena can be a god for 3 weeks and utter mediocrity of an offensive player for 3 years. But those 3 weeks make him an Astros legend for life. In the postseason, random stars or over one's head perform. They happen every year. Of course, it would be a tremendous bonus and make the Astros skiing a lot smoother on a slope if they had Verlander looking like Verlander and Tucker back in April and May Tuck form. But it's not like they're dead without them. And, another dose of reality on Verlander. If, in the most likely scenario, the Astros are the 3 seed, you're playing a best of 3 series to get to the division series. Depending on how they line up late in the regular season, Game 1 is Framber Valdez, Game 2 is Hunter Brown, or vice versa. If there's a Game 3, that's 1 game to keep your season alive. Who in the hell would run Justin Verlander right now out there as the starting pitcher in a do-or-die game? An idiot?
Well, and I mean, you're definitely right. Having the better team does not mean winning at all, because the Astros would have a ring from 2019 if that were the case. Better clear alternatives, Josh. That's interesting phrasing. Better clear alternatives to Justin Verlander, both starting and in the pen, than what Verlander would give them at this point. What does Joe Espada need to see from JV over these next 3 weeks and probably 3 starts? What does he need to see from JV to where Verlander ekes onto that postseason roster?
He's got to be dominant. I mean, there's no way around it. It's been so poor lately. It has to be something that's a complete outlier to what you've been seeing lately. And the fact that, getting through 5 innings with him now, you're just like, oh, thank God. His last 3 outings, 5 innings, 4 2/3, and 3 innings. That's a problem. Now, I know they have a bullpen you can go to in the postseason, but this is the postseason. This isn't out here to try and get your last drip out of Verlander and make everybody feel good. You got to win these ball games. And if that 3rd game, like Charlie mentioned, if you're playing for your life for that game, you can't feel good about it unless Verlander comes out in these next, whether it's 2 or 3 starts, he's got to go 7 and give up like a run. And the eye test has got to look good. He didn't strike anybody out against Arizona in those 3 innings. That's the other part. He's not getting whiffs, and he's given up a lot of contact to those fastballs. Minute Maid's a small ballpark. It's easy to give up some home runs on 4-seam fastballs. He's got to be dominant. He's got to look like old Verlander, not old Verlander, like classic vintage Verlander is what he's got to look like. And he's got to locate his pitches. He has to be able to use the slider, the curveball, even some changeups. And the fastball, he has to be hitting the top of the zone and getting swing and miss. if not, the thing is, you do have other options. You have some other pitchers that have been pitching really well. So there is a chemistry issue. A lot of these guys look up to Verlander and Joe Espada and even Jim Crane. We know Jim Crane's a big Verlander guy. There's no doubt about that. And Dana Brown too. How wouldn't you be? But at the end of the day, it's about performance. So to answer your question, Brandon, he's got to come out and look dominant in these next 2-3 starts, or I don't know how you give him the ball. I just think you have to go with somebody else.
The way the schedule falls, Verlander's next 2 starts will both be against the Angels. So what kind of barometer really would that be, even if he shows decent results? I do know this. It's a virtual impossibility to last 7 innings when you're throwing your 80th pitch of the game in the 4th inning.
Fair.
I'll give you guys the final word on the upcoming schedule or Verlander or whatever you want to do. Any parting thoughts for this episode?
Yeah, the Astros at 77 and 66 starting the A series to get to 90 wins, 13-6. That would be a pretty significant finishing kick. I'd probably take the under on that, but it's still doable. It will not take 13-6 to win the division, but my eye is to Cleveland. The Astros' clear goal now, because you don't want a goal to beat, to not choke. The clear goal is to get within 3 of the Guardians going there the final weekend of the season. And then you want to see if Justin Verlander's on the playoff roster, if he would line up to pitch one of those games against the Guardians. Would the Astros even pitch him in that game if you have Kikuchi or Blanco on 4 days rest available to go? The Guardians start this week with 3 games against the White Sox. So if you're an Astros fan, hope the White Sox somehow can take one of those. And then Cleveland scuffles a little bit over the next 2.5 weeks. So the Astros go to Cleveland with maybe a shot of getting that 2nd seed and avoiding the best of 3.
I'm just curious who will be the 3rd starter in a playoff series if it's not Verlander. Arrighetti, he had a blip, but he's also been brilliant. He's done some things with strikeout numbers we've never seen in the history of the AL. Kikuchi, they just seem to win. The magic formula, when he goes out there, the Astros win ball games. And then, of course, Blanco, there was talk that, he should have, been on the All-Star team. He was brilliant to start the season, and he was good again the other day. I'm just curious which way, if it's not Verlander, which way will they lean with that number 3 starter? Because they have some good options, but Arrighetti's a rookie and Kikuchi only had him for so long and he doesn't have a ton of playoff experience. And, with Blanco, he was great, but with the innings piling up, he's never really done something like this in the big leagues before, been a dominant starter. I'm curious to see how Dana Brown and Joe Espada make a decision on that.
That will be opponent dictated, right? Fromber and Brown are 1-2 no matter who they're facing. The Royals this season have a losing record against left-handed starters. So to me, it's Kikuchi if you're facing the Royals. Again, and that would be game 3 of a best of 3. Cleveland, meanwhile, has mauled left-handed starting pitching this season, 28-11 record in games against opposing starting lefties. So I would tilt Arrighetti. But on top of that, right, the gimmicky nature of short series baseball, and not in the best of 3, but especially when you get to off days. But in game 3, whoever you're starting, you can have your bullpen warming up as the opening pitch is thrown, because you're going to have multiple starters along with most of your bullpen, subject to how the first 2 games have gone, available in that 1 game to advance scenario.
Yeah, and Blanco could be a real X factor in long relief in the playoffs because his background is as a closer. So he does have experience coming out of the pen. So I'm very curious, and you talked about it, Josh, how the innings piling up for him, but that could be a really good solution to use him in short bursts, maybe 2 to 3 innings of dominance instead of asking to get 5 or 6 out of him at this point of the season. So it remains to be seen, but I'm very curious to see how they utilize him going into the postseason. That's going to be it for this episode of Stone Cold Stros. If you listen on podcasts on places like Apple or Spotify and you enjoy the show, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating. Charlie, Josh, and I will catch you next week, but you don't have to wait that long to get your Houston Sports Fix, because all you do is subscribe to this channel, Sports Map Houston and Sports Map Texans on YouTube. We'll have more content for you during the week, including a preview of Bears Texans for all you Texans fans out there that will be dropping on Thursday over on Sports Map Texans. Thank you for listening. Until next time, go Stros.